ever get lost in a video game? Or maybe like really into a costume. Like for a sec you feel like that character, but then the costume's off and you're back to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Buddhism has this whole fascinating take on that idea.
Oh, yeah.
Saying our sense of self might be kind of like a costume we wear.
Interesting.
We're diving into the Buddhist concept of the five aggregates.
Okay.
It's about how our sense of self might be more fluid and less solid than we think.
Right.
If you find this deep dive helpful, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more.
Definitely.
So the Buddha taught that our self isn't like this fixed thing.
Huh?
It's more like a combo of five constantly changing aggregates.
Okay.
Like ingredients in a recipe.
I see.
These aggregates work together to make it seem like there's a me that's continuous.
Right.
But actually each part is temporary and they're all linked.
Interesting. So what are these aggregates?
The first one is form, or Rupa.
Form.
This is all the tangible stuff. Our bodies, trees, stars, everything we experience physically.
Makes sense.
Understanding form is key because it reminds us that our bodies are always changing.
Always in flux, yeah.
So if our self were really just pacing, our body, wouldn't it stay the same?
Right, it would have to.
Exactly.
So what's the second aggregate?
That's feeling, or Vedanā.
A feeling.
This is like a whole range of sensations.
Okay.
Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral.
Gotcha.
Think about it. The joy of a hug, the pain of a paper cut, even just feeling the chair under you right now.
Yeah.
All those feelings come and go like waves, never staying the same.
I do.
So then how can we find a lasting sense of self in those changing feelings?
Good point. It seems impossible.
It really does. The third aggregate is perception, or sanya.
Perception.
This is our ability to recognize and label our experiences.
Okay.
It's like we're putting labels on everything.
Like what?
We see a shape and call it a tree,
Right.
which hears sounds and call it music.
Makes sense.
But those labels aren't like facts of the universe. They're just mental things we create that shape how we see reality.
Interesting. So our sense of self is influenced by how we label things.
Totally. Then we have mental formations, or saikara.
Okay. Mental formations.
Now this is where it gets really interesting.
Why is that?
This aggregate includes all our thoughts, beliefs, intentions, desires, and habits.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's like the constant chatter of the mind.
Yeah, I know that chatter well.
The key here is that these mental formations aren't fixed parts of you.
Oh.
They're more like bubbles, always forming and then popping.
So I'm not my thoughts.
Exactly. You're not your thoughts or desires or anxieties.
That's a relief.
It can be. And finally, we have consciousness, or
this.
it's our awareness, the ability to experience the world through our senses.
Okay.
But just like the other aggregates, consciousness isn't some unchanging thing.
So it's not static.
Nope. It's a process, always shifting and responding to what's around us.
I see. Like a mirror reflecting whatever's in front of it.
That's a great way to put it.
So these five aggregates.
Form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness.
Right.
They're all interacting and influencing each other.
Like a dance.
Yeah. And from that dance, the illusion of a solid, separate self appears.
But if we look closely, we can see it's all just movement and change.
Right. So how did the Buddha explain this complex idea in a way that's easy to grasp?
Well, he used analogies.
Like what?
One of them is the chariot analogy.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. Tell me more.
Imagine a chariot. The wheels, the axle, the seat, the reins.
Okay.
Each part has a job, but no one part as thus the chariot.
Right. It only exists as a concept, a label for all those parts working together.
Precisely.
So our sense of self is like that, a label we give to this collection of aggregates.
Exactly. It's not a separate, enduring thing.
It's the interaction of these elements that creates the illusion of a me.
Yes.
So our sense of self is kind of like a temporary thing, not a fixed reality.
That's a good way to put it.
This is deep stuff.
It is. And this is where it starts to get really profound.
How so?
Because if we cling to the idea of a solid, unchanging self, we're setting ourselves up for suffering.
Because we're clinging to something that doesn't actually exist in that way.
Exactly. The Buddha taught that understanding the impermanence of the five aggregates is key to freeing ourselves from that suffering.
That's like realizing the chariot is just a bunch of parts.
Yeah.
And if we let go of our attachment to that label, we can experience more freedom.
Powerful insight.
I'm already thinking about my own experiences in a new light.
That's great.
But before we go any further, can we dive a little deeper into each aggregate?
Absolutely. Let's start with the parable of the mask.
Sounds intriguing.
Imagine a village where everyone wears masks during a festival.
Okay.
Each mask represents a different character.
Got it.
Over time, they get so into their roles that they forget they're even wearing masks.
They get totally lost in those temporary identities.
Exactly. They start to believe they are those characters. Then a wise elder comes along and tells everyone to take off their masks. The elder says, "See, you are none of these roles. They're just appearances, costumes you wear for a while."
It's like waking up from a dream.
Yeah.
Realizing we've been identifying with something that isn't really us.
This parable beautifully illustrates how our sense of self is often like a mask,
A temporary collection of attributes, thoughts, and habits.
rather than our true nature.
It makes you question everything you think you know about yourself.
It does. So how does this play out in our everyday lives?
Yeah. Can you give us some examples of how clinging to each aggregate can cause suffering?
Let's start with form. Think about how much we focus on our physical appearance.
It's true. People spend hours trying to get the perfect body.
Always comparing ourselves to others.
Yeah. But if we understand form as an impermanent aggregate,
Something that's always changing and ultimately beyond our control.
we can start to let go of that self-criticism and appreciate our bodies for what they are.
Vessels that allow us to experience life.
It makes you realize how much unnecessary suffering we create by clinging to unrealistic ideals.
It does. And it's not just about looks.
What else?
Clinging to the form aggregate can also show up as attachment to possessions.
Like thinking more stuff will make you happy.
Exactly. But that happiness usually fades pretty quickly.
Like they say, you can't take it with you.
Exactly. Understanding the impermanence of form can help us let go of material things and appreciate the simple joys.
So how does this concept of impermanence apply to feeling?
Well, think about how we try to chase pleasant feelings and avoid unpleasant ones.
We all want to feel good. It's human nature.
Of course.
Yeah.
But the problem is when we cling to those good feelings as if they'll last forever.
Or try to push away bad feelings like they shouldn't exist.
Exactly. The truth is both pleasant and unpleasant feelings are temporary.
And by understanding that, we can have a more balanced relationship with our emotions.
We can experience joy without clinging and sadness or anger without resistance.
It's about accepting the whole range of human emotions as they come and go.
Without judgment.
And that acceptance can bring peace even when things are tough.
Absolutely.
This is already changing how I think about my own emotions.
It's powerful stuff.
So what about perception? How does clinging to that aggregate create suffering?
Remember, perception is about how we label and categorize our experiences.
Right.
We create stories about ourselves, others, and the world, often based on limited info and past conditioning.
It's like looking at everything through our own personal filter.
And these stories can get really stuck in our minds.
Like we start to believe they're the absolute truth.
Even when they're not helpful.
That's like a thought loop on repeat.
Exactly. And these thought loops can cause a lot of suffering.
Like how?
We might hold on to a self-image of being not good enough or unlovable,
Ouch.
which can hurt our relationships and keep us from going after our dreams.
So understanding the perception aggregate can help us break free from these negative thoughts.
It can. By recognizing that our perceptions are just that, perceptions, not absolute truths.
So we need to question our assumptions.
Yeah.
And try to see things from different angles.
Exactly. And by doing that, we can start to loosen the grip of those limiting beliefs.
And open up to new possibilities.
Yes. It's about reclaiming our agency.
This is so eye-opening.
It is.
I'm really curious to hear how all this connects to the last two aggregates. Mental formations and consciousness.
We'll get to those.
But for now, let's give our listeners a moment to process what we've talked about so far.
Good idea.
We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into the 5 aggregates.
Back again for our deep dive on the 5 aggregates.
We've been exploring how these aggregates make it seem like there's a solid self, when really there isn't.
And how holding on to that idea can lead to suffering.
So far, we've talked about form, feeling, and perception.
Now we're going to get into the last two, mental formations and consciousness.
Let's start with mental formations, or sakkara.
This aggregate is all about what's happening in our minds, our thoughts, beliefs, intentions, desires, and habits.
It's like that voice in your head that never shuts up.
It's powerful stuff because these mental formations shape how we see the world and how we act with others.
So how can clinging to this aggregate cause suffering?
Well, think about how often we get stuck in negative thought patterns.
Yeah, like those loops of self-doubt or worry.
Right. We might keep replaying past mistakes in our heads.
Or stressing about stuff that hasn't even happened yet.
It's like we're torturing ourselves.
So the key is to realize these thoughts aren't facts.
They're just things that pop up in our minds and then disappear like everything else.
So instead of getting carried away by them, we can learn to just watch them without judgment.
Exactly. Like if you're sitting by a busy street watching the cars go by.
Okay.
You see each car, but you don't jump in front of it and try to drive.
I get it.
In the same way, we can observe our thoughts without getting caught up in them.
So we acknowledge them, but don't let them control us.
This is actually a big part of mindfulness meditation.
And it can really help us feel more peaceful and clear-headed.
Now on to the last aggregate, consciousness or Vedanā.
This is our awareness, our ability to experience the world.
But just like the other aggregates, consciousness isn't a fixed thing.
It's always changing and adapting.
Right. And if we hold on to the idea of a fixed consciousness, that can cause suffering too.
How so?
Well, think about how much we resist change.
We like things to stay the same even when we know that's impossible.
We cling to a certain identity, or we fear losing things or people we love.
But everything changes.
Nothing stays the same.
And by clinging to this idea of a solid self, we're fighting against the natural flow of life.
And that resistance causes suffering.
So how can understanding consciousness help us deal with change better?
By realizing that our awareness is like a river, always flowing and changing.
We can learn to ride the waves without getting pulled under?
Exactly. We embrace impermanence and find peace in the present moment.
That's a beautiful image.
To show this idea of impermanence even better, let's look at the analogy of a river and its reflection.
Ooh, rivers and reflections, very zen. How does it work?
Picture yourself by a river looking at your reflection.
I see myself.
But is that reflection really you?
Well, it looks like me, but it's not actually me.
Right. It's just light bouncing off the water.
It changes all the time depending on the light in the water.
Exactly. And just like that reflection isn't the river, the self we see isn't a real separate thing.
It's just a reflection made by the Five Aggregates.
Yes. And the Buddha taught that recognizing this impermanence is key to freeing ourselves from being attached to a fixed sense of self.
Because if we're holding on to something that's always changing, it's going to cause pain.
Exactly. By understanding the impermanence of the Five Aggregate, we can loosen our grip and experience life more openly and with more compassion.
It's like realizing we don't need to hold on to that reflection because it's not who we truly are.
It's about seeing the flow of experience without getting lost in that illusion of a fixed self.
I'm really getting this idea of impermanence now.
It's powerful stuff.
So if our sense of self is like that reflection in the river, always changing and not really real, then what is our true nature? What's beyond these Five Aggregates?
Now that is a big question.
Is it something you can even put into words?
Some say words can only point us in the right direction. They can't fully explain it.
I see.
Ultimately, experiencing our true nature is a personal journey.
It's about peeling back the layers of what we've been taught and what we're holding on to.
Right. It's about direct experience more than just understanding it intellectually.
But the teachings in the Five Aggregates give us a framework for that journey.
Yes. They help us see through the illusion of a separate self and move towards a deeper understanding of who we really are.
This has been so insightful.
I'm glad you think so.
I feel like I'm seeing myself and the world in a whole new way.
That's what it's all about.
So what else is there to learn in part 3?
In the final part, we'll talk about how to actually use this knowledge.
I can't wait to hear how these ideas can actually benefit us in our daily lives.
It's all about putting theory into practice.
Well, we'll be looking forward to wrapping up this deep dive next time.
And to all our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring the Five Aggregates and see what they mean to you.
We'll see you back here soon for the grand finale. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Five Aggregates.
We've talked about how these aggregates create our sense of self.
And how that self is actually way more fluid than we think.
We've used analogies like the chariot and the river reflection
to illustrate how clinging to a fixed self can cause suffering.
Right.
Now I'm excited to see how we can apply this to our everyday lives.
Yeah. How can we use this to create more peace and freedom?
Exactly.
One of the most powerful ways is through mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
By being mindful of each of the Five Aggregates, we can start to see them more clearly and let go of our attachments.
So instead of getting swept away by our thoughts and feelings, we can observe them without judgment.
Exactly.
Like we're scientists studying our own minds and bodies.
It's about being curious, not judgmental.
So how does that look in practice?
Let's start with form. The physical aggregate mindfulness of form could involve paying attention to your breath.
Noticing the rise and fall of your chest.
Yeah, it's like really tuning into the physical sensations of being alive.
Right here, right now.
You can also bring that awareness to other physical sensations.
Like what?
The feeling of your feet on the ground or the warmth of the sun on your skin.
It's about appreciating this amazing body we have.
Exactly.
So what about feeling? The aggregate of sensation.
With feeling, mindfulness is about noticing pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings as they come and go.
Without getting caught up in the stories we create around them.
Right, so you don't cling to good feelings or push away bad ones.
You just let them be.
You observe how they feel in your body without judging them.
Like watching clouds drift by.
Exactly. You notice them, but you don't try to control them.
And perception. The aggregate of labeling and categorizing.
Mindfulness of perception is about noticing the stories we tell ourselves about our experiences.
Those judgments we make.
Right. You might catch yourself saying a situation is unfair, or a person is annoying.
But by noticing those labels,
you start to see that they're just thoughts, not facts.
Which can help us break free from limiting beliefs.
And open up to new possibilities.
Okay, what about mental formations? All those thoughts and habits.
Mindfulness of mental formations is about noticing your thoughts without getting carried away by them.
So not trying to stop them or change them?
It's more about creating some space between you and your thoughts.
So you're not totally identified with them.
Like you're watching your thoughts instead of being them.
Interesting. And consciousness. The aggregate of awareness.
Mindfulness of consciousness is about being present in each moment.
Just noticing what's happening without clinging or resisting.
It's like watching a movie without getting caught up in the plot.
All of these mindfulness practices sound really helpful.
They can be. It's like you're seeing the world with new eyes.
And as we practice mindfulness,
we start to let go of that attachment to a fixed self.
We realize we're not our thoughts or feelings or even our bodies.
There's something bigger than that.
And that can be incredibly freeing.
It can free us from suffering and open us up to more peace and joy.
This has been an amazing journey.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much about myself and the world.
Remember, this journey of self-discovery never really ends.
It's about constantly learning and growing.
And as you continue to explore these teachings,
you might find that your life becomes more joyful and meaningful.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, keep exploring the 5 aggregates.
See how they apply to your own lives.
Maybe they'll bring you more peace and fulfillment on your journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep